Oh, yeah, you're right.
All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Mike Zachelli. I'm the Deputy Administrator and Planner for the Borough. Thank you all for coming out, participating tonight for the redevelopment plan, the Mountainside project over by the School of Nursing, and looking at it comprehensively in the overall context of the hospital development. Tonight, we're looking for your input. We're going to be making presentations, getting your feedback, and this is one step forward in developing the redevelopment plan for the site. So this is the night almost everybody's been waiting for, where we get to talk about nuts and bolts and traffic and things, where objects go on the site. The ultimate goal is to create a master plan or zoning ordinance specific to this area. And that's why we're here with everybody tonight, to help move the ball forward in getting this project developed in a way that's sensitive to the community and meets the needs of healthcare in the context of what's going on in today's environment. We're going to have a presentation first from John Froholm, the CEO from the hospital. They'll be doing their presentation about 20 minutes.
That'd be right.
Okay, and then we'll take questions right after that for their presentation. Then You probably recognize Jessica from H2M and Ralph Walker, and they've brought with them Eric Line from VHB. That's been doing the traffic work for us. They're going to be presenting the work that they've done so far, and then we'll open it up to the public to get your input again and discuss what's been presented. I'll ask that if you could please use the microphones. Tonight we're recording this and they'll be posting it for anybody that can't be here tonight. We'll post it on our website as well so everybody can see. So again, if you just kind of be aware of using the microphone as well, that would be great. And so now we'll just turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Name is John Prumhold, CEO at Hackensack UMC Mountainside. I see some familiar faces, so I'll apologize in advance. Some of this information you may have seen earlier, but we're here tonight to kind of talk about how we're going to continue to make the commitment to this community to be transparent on what our plans are and to provide you a deeper understanding of why we're doing things in the effort that we are, demonstrate how we plan to address the community's current and future healthcare needs with this project, and provide a forum for some dialogue and some back and forth with the questions and answers. We started well over a year ago with keeping the website up, and Natalie Thigpen has done a remarkable job. It was set up, again, in the spirit of transparency to keep people informed on the campus improvements, make sure we got the right information out to the community, and we continue to keep that up. This particular slide I actually used for employee orientation to give them a perspective of how long the hospital has been here serving the community. We're coming on 125 years. And I think this particular quote, this actually goes back to 1891, when the founders of the hospital came together to bring Mountainside to be, still applies today. The hospital is a necessity, is urgently needed, and we heartily endorse it. It deserves the support of the community as a duty which we owe to our neighbors. Despite numerous ownership changes, Atlantic owned it 11 years, sold it to Merit, a for-profit company, for 5 years, and then it was acquired in a joint venture between Hackensack and another for-profit, LHP. I think we have continued to be focused on our needs of the community we're here to serve. I use this as an example because it's one thing for the CEO to talk about it, but I think this really speaks volumes to our employees. Really, the employees and physicians, many of them live here in Glenridge and Montclair. We have alone in Glenridge 21 employees with their homes here, 16 physicians. In Montclair, 112 employees and 61 physicians. So for all practical purposes, it's neighbors caring for neighbors. But this particular quote, actually the highest significant value from the workplace survey we just conducted with our employees on great places to work, I'd like to read to you because I think it tells you exactly what the employees feel. And they find a great sense of meaning in their work and feel connected to their patients and the community. The dedication to maintaining a high level of customer service, quality, and patient care drives a strong sense of pride in Mountainside employees and fuels their desire to stay at Mountainside long term. That's the employees speaking in the Great Places to Work survey. So again, we've got a lot of ties to the community. But we're involved in a very challenging time that's rapidly evolving in healthcare. Massive change is going on. I don't need to tell you that, but I'll remind you of it. By 2020, 1 in 3 hospitals is expected to either close or change the type of services they offer to their community. So massive changes are underway. And this particular chart that actually was put out by the New Jersey Hospital Association reflects in the last 23 years there's been 26 hospital closures in New Jersey. And there's been 8 different bankruptcies filed since 2007. That 8 is actually understated by 2. I'm sure you've read in the press recently bankruptcy proceedings at East Orange as well as St. Michael's. So it's a changing environment. Some hospitals will survive, some hospitals will not. We plan to be a survivor and be here. But it's changing dramatically in how we deliver health care. So the little graph that shows from 2005 to 2014, the total patient days in the hospital have dropped dramatically as the insurance plans and Medicare have pushed hospitals to move care to an outpatient setting. So when the hospital was built many years ago with many hospital beds, at a time that, you know, many of you in this room, I can identify having my tonsils out as a kid and being in the hospital for 3 days eating ice cream. We do that in 3 hours now, in and out. So healthcare has changed dramatically. No better example than what you see here on the inpatient days coming down. This particular graph is attended, if you see from left to right coming down, that's the percent of revenue from inpatient care, and the one going up from left to right, the green, is outpatient care. Outpatient care has now surpassed activity on the inpatient. Additionally, the bars reflect the total paid FTEs at the hospital, relatively flat. As healthcare has moved to outpatient, less inpatient, our employment base has pretty much remained the same, about 1,200, 1,300 paid equivalents. Some people say, what's the change? Well, there's less inpatient, more outpatient, but the overall employment base is pretty much the same over time. But we have to adjust how we deliver care to more of an outpatient setting. Today we're at a bit of a competitive disadvantage. The two hospitals that compete in our market is St. Barnabas and Claire Moss. They both have medical office buildings on campus. Claire Moss is actually in the process of expanding theirs. We do not have that particular service. So we're at a crossroads. The situation of the neighboring hospitals is a stark contrast to what we have. They have medical office building space, we do not. And we have to make some choices going forward for how we're going to deliver care to the community. And we need to move decisively, we need to move ahead on this in a timely fashion. So, competitive in a rapid evolving environment, the future for a successful hospital is going to be part of a network and be able to deliver not just inpatient care, but outpatient care, as well as primary care access and acute care access, as well as post-acute access. So just being a hospital for inpatient care is not the future. It's going to be able to better position yourself for the delivery of care. Take a look at the community needs today. When you look at the statistics that are pretty constant in healthcare on the number of physicians to population base, today we're 45 primary care doctors short for the population base we serve. 45 primary care doctors short. Not unique. Most hospitals, most markets are short, but that means a big change in how you receive health care in this community. We also have a deficit of no Class A office space available for our doctors on campus. Okay? I may not tell you it's difficult to recruit to New Jersey. High cost of living, okay, makes it very difficult to recruit doctors. You need to find a doctor that has a reason to be in New Jersey, usually family, and if they have a spouse, you better be sure the spouse also has a reason to be in New Jersey. Okay? So it's difficult to recruit to fill that deficit, and we have an aging population that we're serving. Okay? We have an aging medical staff. Internal medicine, a third of them are over 60. Family medicine, a third are over 60. Active medical staff in general is almost a third over 60. And the CEO, 100% of them are over 60. So I can identify with the aging. This is actually a list of what we go through on community needs. We take a look at what the community really needs on health care. We got to be sure we're providing what the community needs. Look at Essex County as a reflection of what we have compared to the U.S. and as well as New Jersey. We're higher in dementia, asthma, kidney disease, diabetes, heart failure, heart disease, osteoporosis, and stroke. We're higher in Essex County than New Jersey as well as the United States in these healthcare. You'll see how some of this ties closely to the physicians and specialties we're trying to put in that medical office building. This is the deficit, supply, and demand deficit. Primary care, we're short 44. Our plans over the next 3 years is to recruit 18 primary care providers, internal medicine, family practice, and another 9 in obstetrics, okay, to meet that deficit in primary care. Community needs, okay, new doctors, it's a new day, okay. They're not interested in coming out and going alone. They're interested in employment. 10 years ago, doctors coming out of residency, 11% went under hospital employment. 10 years later, in 2014, almost 2/3 won employment by a hospital. Percent of new physicians in solo practice has gone from 20% less than 1%. I've yet to meet a resident coming out that has any desire to go it alone. It's become much too complicated. They train, they want to be able to be provided a setting so they can provide care to their patients and have the administrative issues taken care of for them. And that's what this medical office building is intended to do. This kind of shows the different generations. The millennium on the left, these are the values they have, versus some of the old timers like myself. Their happiness, passion, diversity, sharing, discovery. That's what's coming out of the residency programs, the new doctors. That's what's important to them. Values to the strong values for the older generation: justice, integrity, family, practicality, and duty. We have to adjust to the times with what residents are coming out. So a survey just recently done on physicians here in New Jersey were pretty grim. If you have a chance, pull it up on the New Jersey Biz website, read it, and you'll find physicians are pretty negative about the future because how difficult it's become for them to practice. So we're right now looking at a community need of co-locating in one building all these different access to care, primary care as well as specialists, in a very modern MOB setting, and over the next 3 to 4 years to employ that primary care base of 27 primary care providers, family practice, internal medicine, and OB. So a list of some of the specialists that already have an interest in being there, as well as currently in our market on a part-time basis. Okay, rotating pediatric subspecialists, Hackensack's Children's Hospital. Again, we're owned 20% by Hackensack. We've got a phenomenal children's hospital. They want to rotate some of the subspecialists over here. Pediatric cardiology, pediatric asthma, access to care that most do not have access to care today in our community. Orthopedics, there's a great orthopedic group coming together. Surgical oncology, be able to stay here if you have oncology services needed in surgery. ENT, neurosurgery, thoracic, and vascular. These are all the specialists that we plan to put in the medical office building and provide that service to the community. So again, we've gone through a very aggressive and strategic capital infusion at the hospital, but really the centerpiece is the medical office building. So let's take a look. We closely watched the 2003 Glen Ridge Master Plan, which encourages the establishment and maintenance for convenient, well-located community facilities for all residents of the borough, and adapted also the healthcare zone for properties inclusive of Mountainside. So we are very much in sync with that Glen Ridge Master Plan. We have acknowledged parking capacity issues. We are addressing that, of course, and need for modernization and replacement of older facilities like the School of Nursing. Again, going to the 2013 Montclair Unified Land Use and Circulation Plan, they also have a similar plan. We're very consistent with what that particular plan reflects, but it also reflects, again, the number of elderly residents is growing in the area we serve in Montclair and Glen Ridge. And these particular health care issues are very much in growth, as you saw earlier, and you'll see very close ties to that particular need, as well as the specialists we plan to have in the medical office building. So, the medical office building will deliver an increase in ratables for the local tax base. We are for-profit. It's going to safeguard 15 existing jobs at the hospital, and it's going to provide new jobs, about 200, for what's going to eventually be 50 physicians practicing in the new medical office building, and encourage local spending that supports the community in good times and bad. So we're committed for the partnership and transparency with this community as well as Montclair, committed at meeting a mutually beneficial solutions. Progress to date, I think, illustrates our commitment to that. We've kept an open policy on what we're doing, but the resources are finite. When you sit down, there's a lot of great ideas, but there's also oftentimes more than we can afford to fund. The options and time horizon are not unlimited. We need to move on this project, and the project must be feasible for the hospital and physicians. At the end of the day, half that space is the private physicians that need to be able to afford to go into space. We can't build a project so expensive that we find that we're not offering competitive rates. So, summary, MOB project is vital to long-term health and economic well-being. Our current plan is developed with specific needs and concerns of this community in mind. Needs of our neighbors have been paramount. Throughout the planning process, we tried to work very closely with our neighbors, and plans are in keeping with character and aesthetics of the community. We're trying as we can to provide those buffers in the green space, and the need is real and the time is now for us to move forward on that. So I'll stop and take questions. Yes, sir.
What's the split for the ratables for Montclair and Glenridge? Is there a percentage?
That will be negotiated between the two municipalities as part of the redevelopment agreement. So it may not be specifically how much of the building is in Glenridge or Montclair. So that the two governing bodies will all come to an agreement on.
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that there were some positions and other hospital personnel that were employed at Hackensack as well that reside in the area. Would you be able to tell me how many of those employees reside within a half a mile radius of the hospital?
How many live? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the whole question. I have trouble hearing.
How many of the employees reside within a half mile of the hospital?
How many of my current employees live within a half a mile? I do not know that. I do know that earlier slide shows the number of employees and positions from Glenridge and Montclair that have addresses with Montclair and Glenridge.
Correct.
But I don't know how close.
I would be interested in that.
We'll certainly try to provide that.
I want to second that. I think that's very, very important. There's one employee that you said, or many, employee that lives in Glenridge, Department of
Correct.
16 positions in Glenridge.
Correct.
Do they live within a couple of blocks of the hospital? Will they be impacted negatively or positively with any redevelopment of that area? I mean, if you're to say that you have, that there are neighbors, well, there are, everybody in the world are neighbors, right?
Right.
Are they a neighbor within the vicinity of where we live?
I don't know the specifics of how many are that close.
Excuse me one moment. You can please give your name and address for the record?
Sure.
So I appreciate that.
Paul Gerbino, G-E-R, is a boy, I-N-O, 272 Bay Avenue, Glenridge, New Jersey.
In the previous? Okay. Great, thank you.
And can I ask if people can come up and use the mic, because I'm also trying to capture information and I can't always hear your questions, so I know.
And going to Natalie's point, we're all, we're going to plan on televising this meeting, so we are taping, so we really appreciate everybody coming up so that we can get the audio. And then, John, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
What? Any other questions? I guess that shut the questions down. All right. So, any others I can help address? All right. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm glad.
Yes.
Hi. My question is, you mentioned that there are a number of physicians willing to come over from the other hospitals and share the space. So I'm wondering, is there going to be dedicated full-time physician space for those people that will have offices permanently, have their major residence be there?
Yeah, the majority of the physicians going to the medical office building will be full-time. Some of the subspecialists in pediatrics I mentioned earlier will probably be a rotation where the demand for full-time presence is not really there. So under the Hackensack faculty model for pediatric care, we expect them to have one office and rotate probably 4 or 5 subspecialties through there. So that, you know, if you're a parent and you have a child that's in need of a pediatric cardiologist, they would be available at least once a week on campus.
Before you go, could you give your name and address?
Oh, hi. My name is Rebecca Hughes. I'm at 277 Bay Avenue.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else? I got off luckier than the Republicans on the debate tonight. So, who's next? Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, if you want. Yeah.
Okay. So, I
Thank you.
just asked if you're going to say any, and so if you guys come up with questions later, we'll be here to answer.
All right.
so my name is Jessica Giorgiani. I'm with H2M. I'm a planner with H2M. Also speaking at this portion is going to be Eric DeLine with VHB and Ralph Walker with Smith Mayer, an architect. So the way that we got here is the Township of Montclair, the Borough of Glenridge, they both issued an RFP requesting consultants to prepare a redevelopment plan, knowing that this project needs to move forward. And so we are, Eric with VHB and me with H2M, we responded to that RFP and we were awarded the project. And so we're working on behalf of Glenridge and Montclair, okay? And this is Ralph, and Ralph is the Montclair Township architect. So he's also working on behalf of the Township of Montclair and assisting in this project generally. So just wanted to make sure everyone knows who's who on this project. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about the redevelopment plan, redevelopment process generally before we get into the concept. Then we're going to talk specifically about the area, the issues, and then Eric's going to talk about the traffic issues specifically, and then we'll wrap it up and be able to answer your questions. Okay? So in terms of this redevelopment rehabilitation process, it's really 3 major steps. And if you were at the last meetings that we did as part of this, you've seen this slide before, you basically conduct a study to see if an area meets the criteria that is set in the New Jersey state law, the local redevelopment and housing law. If it does meet the criteria, you designate an area redevelopment or rehabilitation. Phase 2 is then preparing and adopting a redevelopment plan, and that's what we're doing. And phase 3 would be selecting the redeveloper, negotiating the redevelopment agreement, and then actually implementing the plan. So as you know, you came to the meeting, so the area has been designated a redevelopment area, and now we are preparing the plan. Everyone is familiar with the study area. And this was what was put into the RFP, and this is what we are putting together a plan for. Okay, so here we have the hospital at the corner of Bay and Highland. To the north here is the current nursing school property, surrounded by Bay Ave, Walnut Crescent, and Roswell Terrace. Across the street from, this is Highland Ave here, across from Highland Ave are a number of properties that are owned by the hospital. I should say all of these properties except one are owned by the hospital currently. And then we have George Street coming through like this, and we have the hospital parking deck and doctor's lot here. This line is showing the boundaries between Glenridge and Montclair. So Highland Ave kind of stops right there and Walnut Crescent begins right there. In terms of land uses in the area, I just kind of went over them, but we have the nursing school. Currently, there are some homes here that are owned by the hospital. There's some vacant land, a couple of homes here. This is Sherman. It's not labeled, but it is Sherman. It's a really small street off of George Street that connects you into the parking garage lot. And this is parking. The current zoning for the area is varied, since we're talking about 2 different towns. As John from the hospital mentioned, there's a hospital zoning on the Glenridge side, but on the Montclair side, it's very old zoning that is residential, low-density R1 and low-density R2. So we're dealing with a bunch of different requirements here. And so the process now is to develop a redevelopment plan, and that process is somewhat governed, again, by the local redevelopment and housing law. And it states what must be in a redevelopment plan and what must be part of the process, including meetings and things like that. So we must put into the plan the planning goals and objectives, including the plan's relationship to local objectives, including land use, density, transportation, public utilities, recreation, community facilities, and public improvement. We have to put a description and analysis of the concept plan, including the proposed uses and the building requirements, and one of the benefits of doing a redevelopment plan is that the municipality, and in this case, two municipalities, have substantial control over what goes into that redevelopment plan. So with a normal zoning ordinance, which many of you have probably seen, it really just lists your building can be this height, your building setback can be this, but it doesn't really tell you what you're going to get in the end. With a redevelopment plan, it's more of a hybrid between, say, a master plan, where you can show concepts and graphically show things, and zoning ordinance. And so you have a lot more flexibility over what you're allowed to put in the plan. So you can control things down to the very building level, the site level, the number of parking spaces, where landscaping needs to go, where sidewalks need to go, and so on. So you're allowed a lot more control, which is one of the reasons we wanted to do this, a redevelopment plan, rather than just straight zoning for this area, because there are a number of issues, as you're going to hear, and those issues can be better addressed in a redevelopment plan than they can in just straight zoning ordinance. Okay. These are just statutory requirements. The plan has to address any relocation assistance, provision for the temporary and permanent relocation of residents in the area, any property acquisitions. In this case, there are no, because no property acquisitions, neither town is using eminent domain. And then the plan's relationship to the regulations of surrounding municipalities, the counties, and the state plan. Oh, and also whether or not the redevelopment plan will supersede the zoning ordinance or serve as an overlay. And I imagine that it will supersede. It also must address any procedures for amending the redevelopment plan in the future. Okay, so now to get to the meat of the presentation. We know from going through the redevelopment study process and evaluating the area, evaluating the street, and through this process and doing the traffic analysis that Eric's going to go over, having prior meetings, speaking with residents, we understand a lot of the issues to date. But the reason we're having this meeting is because we need to hear from you. In a minute, I'll be showing you what the hospital has provided so far, but the idea is to take what they provided, but to also listen to the feedback that all of you have to give and other residents through this process, and come up with a plan that is mutually beneficial. That the hospital can benefit, they get the medical office building that they're looking for, but also the community is satisfied, and the towns are satisfied that enough parking is going to be provided, that the circulation is going to work for all uses, for the ambulances, for the trucks, for the cars, for the pedestrians, for the bicyclists. And so that's why we're going through this. So some of the concerns that we've heard to date are that the neighbors want to make sure that the encroachment of the hospital isn't going to just continually grow into the surrounding neighborhoods. One of the concerns was the loss of housing. The concerns of the visual impact of what new development will bring. The exacerbation of existing parking problems, the illegal parking that we know occurs on the streets, that we know occurs even on the hospital site itself, with people ditching their cars and running into the emergency room, just not enough places to park your car, or in the right places. And the general shortages of parking, which is why you see the illegal parking and so forth. Another area of concern, a big one, is safe circulation for pedestrians and vehicles. We learned a lot at the meeting that we just had with the Laurel Place residents about things taking place, vehicles turning illegally, backing up into Laurel Place where they shouldn't. We know that there are major problems with this intersection, which is currently unsignalized. It's really two intersections there that are very close together, and that presents a lot of problems. Eric's going to go more into that. We know that there's issues with ambulance traffic, and just generally, there's quite a few circulation issues. We know that one of the concerns is to make sure that the development is generating tax revenues for both municipalities. We heard at the Montclair meeting that one of their issues is they want to see more green space. Sure, the plans sure look like we're providing a lot of surface parking, but not a whole lot of green space. Concern also includes quality of life impacts. Noise and litter, not just during the construction of the project, but then just generally. We heard when we were doing the previous phase, conducting the study, that some residents want the hospital to participate more in community health outreach. And what does that look like? And certainly ensuring that new development has adequate parking for not only what they're proposing and what's existing, but what about the future? We know that once we get this building up here, that's not the end of it, that as John was talking, the dynamics of the hospital, they change over time. What our medical needs are constantly evolving, and how can we plan today for what might occur tomorrow? Okay, so this is a colorized concept. Many of you have probably already seen this. Could you raise your hands if you've already seen this concept? Okay, great. So some, not all. So we're at the stage where Hampshire and the hospital have provided these concepts to say, well, this is what we want to do. We need an office building of 60,000 square feet here. We need a way to safely get in and out of the site. And we need to have enough parking for not only the MOB, but also the entire site and all the other uses that are taking place on it. They need to provide things such as handicap parking and so forth. So just to generally orient you, this is the main hospital site here. This is where the nursing school is right now. And then across, this is where the sick homes are and the vacant land, and down here is the parking garage. Okay? This is Highland Ave, this is Bay, and this is Walnut Crescent, and this is Claremont. Okay. So, the concept, this is the concept, I think they've had quite a few iterations already, but this is the latest concept that we have anyway, that shows the proposed 60,000 square foot medical building. They're proposing to keep this 40-foot wide? 40-foot wide buffer here up against Roswell Terrace, which is excellent. That's an existing, 40 feet is quite big, an existing buffer there. So their project proposes to keep that buffer, which is heavily treed. There's also a nice buffer here along Walnut Crescent, and if you're familiar, there's a nice little stone wall, and the grade kind of dips down slightly so that you can't see all of the parking area because of the nice grade there. So the proposal does keep that wall and that buffer along there. One of the main differences, though, is that whereas the nursing school takes up a large portion of the site, this proposed building is a lot smaller than that. You couldn't actually put in a medical office building as big as a nursing school because you would just need way more parking than you could possibly get on this site. So without putting underground parking or something. So they have the medical office building at 60,000 square feet. And another major difference is right now the ingress and egress to the site is up here on Walnut Crescent, just south of Roswell Terrace. There's also another little driveway that's here, but the main access is up here. And what they're proposing in the latest plan is to make a single point of ingress and egress here at the intersection of Bay and Highland. And the reason they propose this is so that when you're coming off of Bay or Highland or Walnut Crescent, I should say this intersection is proposed to be signalized. That is one of the big changes there. So it would be a signalized intersection, and the length of this driveway is so big to allow for vehicle stacking there. And the reason that you would need the vehicle stacking is because this is actually would be a gated entrance, because you don't want people who are trying to go to the emergency room or in the hospital to go and just park quickly in the MOB building. Then there wouldn't be any parking for the people visiting the MOB, medical office building, MOB. There. So you would come into the site here with your vehicle, get your gated access card, and then either come through over here for a drop-off or park your car, and then there's also handicap spaces here, here, and here. So that is, what they're proposing on the site of the nursing school, generally. They're also proposing to accommodate their parking needs across from the main hospital and across from the nursing school here by creating these two lots. The larger lot would be more medical office building parking. And Eric's going to go over the parking requirements and how they compare to what they're providing. And this little lot here, this would be more parking for the emergency room needs. And these also, the reason they have them separated is because they don't want the same thing where emergency room people are coming to park in this lot and vice versa. So these lots, I think, will also be gated. Now, one of our suggestions was, why waste parking spaces, combine the two lots, and still require some sort of gated access there. So the entrance to this lot, from what they're proposing, is right across from the hospital, here off of Highland, and egress as well here. They're also proposing an ingress and egress off of George over here. And I have to say, as you can see, the project sort of ends here at George Street. And I just want to stress that this is the concept that we're working with. This is the concept that we're coming up with ideas and trying to address your issues so that the final concept may look different from this. Here's just a black and white close-up of the medical office building itself. You can come back to this if people have questions. And then I also wanted to show you what their proposed architectural elevations or renderings will be for the medical office building here. And the hospital is here, so they would be able to answer specific questions about the design and so forth, but it's essentially a 3-story building with the main entrance off a bay. And here's a close-up of the Bay Street. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Ralph.
Thanks, Jessica. I want to clarify 2 things just before I get started, just so you understand my role. I work with Smith Marin Architecture and Interiors. We're providing architectural services to Montclair for all of the redevelopment plans that are going on in town. And for any of you who have been following the progress there's a number of redevelopment plans that are happening in Montclair. Part of why we're involved in this process is to help with the consistency of these plans, but also to manage between the different plans that are happening here. So what I'm going to talk about is to piggyback off of what Jessica presented, to talk a little bit more about the campus issues that we have here and the growth opportunities that are here. This aerial shot, as you're probably familiar, here's the hospital. Here is Roswell Terrace. Here's the current nursing school. You can see the parking deck in the back. One of the things that is a challenge in this process for all of us is to not only look at the situation of what we have today and the issues that we have today, but to think both about what's being presented by the hospital with the MOB and think beyond that and think about how is this campus going to evolve and grow, not just in a year, but in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. What can we do in this planning process? What should we do in this planning process that is both accommodating to the needs of the hospital and its long-term growth, and also accommodating to the needs of both Montclair and Glenridge communities? So to go back to the overall plan for a second, the red line, again, is the zone that we're dealing with here. And Jessica really walked you through all the uses. I'm not going to talk so much about the uses. I'm going to talk more about the conditions on the ground, which we're all probably very familiar with. One of the things that's interesting here is that the hospital, because it straddles the boundary between two municipalities, it also happens to straddle the boundary between some very different neighborhoods, and different in terms of scale, different in terms of evolution. So, for instance, Roswell Terrace, as many of you well know, is a beautiful tree-lined street, stately homes, well cared for. As we work our way down to Claremont Avenue and to George Street, the homes are much, much smaller, they're much closer together. There's been some dilapidation of some of the facilities there. We also are up against a rail line. We have both the active New Jersey Transit rail line, which I know some of you probably take every day. There's also the decommissioned rail line, which you may or may not be familiar with as potentially could become a long-term bike trail area, knock wood, or some other use. But that is an opportunity that bounds this site, and it's actually bordered by the hospital property here. Similarly, beyond the hospital, we have residential streets along Hathaway Place and further south. Sherman Avenue is bordering up against this. And then there is some existing commercial uses at the south border of the zone as well as the west border of the zone. So there's a lot of different competing interests that are happening within this overall campus. And I want to highlight that what this plan needs to do is balance those things. So we want to hear all of the specific issues, but recognize that we are trying to balance a pretty wide variety of issues here. So let's just walk around the site. And you all live here. I know you probably know this intimately, but I'll do it anyway for conversation's sake. Here's the hospital with our view up Bay Avenue in View B, and then again down Bay Avenue. As many of you know, coming up from Glen Ridge, Bay Avenue is a street that it's an easy street to accelerate on. It's a straight, wide street. People move up there fast, passing through, sometimes going to the hospital, sometimes continuing along. It's great to have a wide street like this. A new medical office building will be really on this side of the street, and with some potential connection of pedestrians and uses and things like that going back and forth. We have that currently with the existing nursing school. And while that use is limited, and again, Eric's going to talk more about some of those travel patterns, we know that there is a crossing issue across Bay Avenue that needs to be addressed one way or another. Coming up to what I like to call my favorite intersection, we get to Claremont and Walnut Crescent, which, as anyone who drives that pattern, as I do every day, knows, this is a very challenging move. This is a challenging movement for anybody coming through. People coming up Bay sometimes will continue around Walnut Crescent and then go up Walnut or move on to Claremont Avenue. Again, I don't want to steal Eric's thunder because he'll speak more about this. But one of the things that we recognize architecturally and urbanistically is that on one side of Walnut Crescent, you have a beautiful tree-lined street, a great low wall. It's got a good pedestrian pattern, nice sidewalks. There's not good crossing points, and there isn't a lot of greenery or nice sidewalks on the other side. And this is the area where the hospital proposes to put in a new parking lot. So this is an area that we have concerns about greening or providing some buffering, but also maintaining site distances and things like that. Coming up to Walnut Crescent and Roswell Terrace, again, we can see the character of the streets, the care in landscaping, wide sidewalks. Traffic does slow in these areas, partially due to things like traffic calming islands, but it doesn't slow a lot. And at the same time, if we look up now across the zone that the proposed parking lot would go, currently that's a green space, and it's an unused green space. We want to maintain some level of buffering as we get to the residential areas nearby. Working our way around, now we're looking at George Street, and George Street is right here, crosses into Highland Avenue. George Street is a street that really is impacted pretty dramatically by the hospital, by what's currently there, as well as what's proposed. Some of our conversations earlier tonight focused on how are we going to deal with streets like George Street, because there are other streets in Glen Ridge that may need similar attention. And so this is an area of specific concern. I'm going to move, I'll highlight this. This is the area adjacent to the decommissioned rail line that I spoke about previously. This is an opportunity. Thinking again about how do we create green space, how do we create opportunities for bike trails or walking trails, what are some of the amenities that maybe can come out of this plan. When we think about a plan like this, I want to challenge all of you to think not just about what are the problems we have to solve, but what are the things that we're aspiring to, what are the things that we would love to see as opportunities, because that can be a part of this plan as well. And then back to George Street, I focused on this in the Montclair presentation. Again, it's within Montclair, but I want to highlight it because it is one of the creative issues that we have to deal with. One of the conversation points is to actually close George Street and to change the traffic patterns around that street to have more of a positive impact. The main reason we're looking at that is to create some buffering. Here is the property that the hospital is proposing for the parking lot. Here's the connection back to the parking garage. And so if that all became surface parking, the residential character there changes in a really negative way. And so we want to make sure that we're addressing things like buffering. I'm using that as an example here, both to talk about the specifics of what we're talking about in this plan, but again, to give you an example of what we may do on other streets or what we may look to you to get some input about. Similarly, we used Halfway Place as an example of how the connections to Highland Avenue might change. So if George Street changes, Halfway Place changes, maybe further south can change as well. I'm going to turn it over now to Eric to talk briefly about.
Can I ask you a question, please?
Yep.
We love seeing the Montclair portion of it as well. Certainly, it is very informative for us on Laurel Place. I have noticed, though, that every single map that you have cuts off before we see Laurel Place. Now you know our interests, because of our proximity and how much will be affected. Could I please request that Laurel Place be included in any future plans that you present?
So there's an important step here that we should talk about briefly before we go to traffic, because this is actually a critically important step. So the red zone are the areas that were designated in this plan and are really under the purview of what we're doing as consultants right now. This is the place where we can have direct effect. If you want to have properties included into this plan and have the plan zone extended, that can be considered, but it requires a number of steps. So we should talk further about this, and this may not be the place to talk through each of the key steps, but the redevelopment plan right now, because it's critically important, it really is addressing what's happening within the red, and then this white outer boundary is really trying to show the places that would be directly affected, basically across the street from the zones that are within the red. So it's an important point, and I don't want to lose track of it. So let's come back to it maybe at the end. That work? So let's go back. You're up.
So, now that Ralph gave half my presentation, in any case, no, it's not true.
Not true.
So these are just some of the early observations that we had from going out in the field. We've done some parking analysis since then. We're in the process of taking the traffic count data that we did, the turning movement counts, enter that into basically a model to really understand how the area circulates and what some of the impacts of closing George Street, the potential of closing someplace like Laurel Place might have on the circulation of the area. But these are some general things of what we've observed from the data. And if you've lived here, it's obviously no surprise. On Bay Avenue, predominant moves, the heavy moves are really westbound in the AM from Glenridge towards Montclair, and it's the reverse in the PM as well. Most vehicles that we've observed weren't really hospital-related. They weren't moving into the driveway. They weren't necessarily taking a left onto Highland Avenue. They were continuing on from Bay Avenue down to Claremont Avenue into Montclair. There's quite a bit of queuing at the Pine Street-Claremont Ave intersection. That's in Montclair. That's having some impact. I think potentially it's also having some impact on some of the local roadways, because now that it's queuing back, people are looking for alternatives. They're dispersing traffic. It might have that impact on a place like Laurel Place as well. And then since what we did was we did the parking analysis. We went out, we had the cameras up, we set up 3 cameras. One was at the entrance of the parking garage on George Street. The other one was at the exit onto, I think that's Bay Street there. And then we also had a traffic camera pointed at what is currently the sort of the valet parking lot, and you'll see images of that. So what that did was we created sort of this demand parking profile. We went out, we did spot counts to generate a baseline. We used the cameras to measure the ins and the outs of each one of those facilities, and we found basically what the peak period of parking was. So when the garage was most full, when the greatest demand for parking at the parking lot, and we subsequently followed up, and we wanted to see how many vehicles were parked on the streets. That's not to say every vehicle that we counted was necessarily related to hospitals, but we did want to at least have an understanding about, where some of these impacts are. A lot of it we do actually believe is related to the hospital. So this is the sort of the pedestrian movements, the predominant pedestrian movements through the hospital. People generally park at the parking garage that you see right here, and they'll cross in basically one of 2 places. Right here, the Highland Avenue, George Street, that is a signalized intersection. So vehicles or pedestrians typically wait for the lights to turn red on Highland Avenue before they cross. And there's also a pedestrian crossing on Bay Street across Highland Avenue that has a stop for the pedestrians signal. So they cross in both places as they park here. I think it's typically what part of the parking garage they park in is where they choose to cross. And then the other one is this on Bay Avenue. Again, valet parking. This is sort of the north-south connection from this area of the neighborhood. That's actually a signal right now. It basically operates as a pedestrian light. It only turns unless it's actuated by a pedestrian. So in the middle of the day, you'll occasionally see residents going through, but a lot of times what you see is the people that work in valet parking. People will drop off their car. They'll, the valet will take it up, drive it up here, park there, and then that's where they'll cross. So every now and then when that signal changes, it's usually somebody working for valet parking. This is the area, this is sort of the parking supply through the area existing and on-street parking locations. The garage handles about 680 vehicles. 39 is designated for ER. The 107 is for physicians for the hospital, so that's not open to general supply. That's basically hospital employees only. 114 is sort of part of this whole parking supply here. And then 93 basically makes up the valet lot, although I think there's a couple organizations like Plan for Health that have designated parking spots there that we have to supply. Where you see the on-street parking, it's not the only case of on-street parking, but these are areas of Montclair that they allow typically like the 2-hour parking, and that's what we counted specifically. We did go down Hathaway Place, we did go down Laurel Place, and when we did that, what we looked for was parked cars that didn't have that Glen Ridge parking hang tag. So we wanted to see where people were illegally parked, or at least, I think Michael and I drove around that particular day. So we made a couple observations, and he noticed that there was a car parked on, I think it was Hathaway Place, right? It was at the end of Hathaway Place by the Sherman Ave, and the thought was that they hadn't received the new parking tags necessarily. So that's the existing parking supply. So what we did was we took all the existing parking supply and we built a profile based on what we've observed through the video counts. So this is the existing parking accumulation profiles. This blue line right here is that physician's lot. Again, it's sort of here's the capacity of it. Here's what the amount that it's being utilized. It gets to about that peak capacity, but again, that's not really part of the overall parking supply. If you're visiting Hackensack visiting somebody at the hospital, you're going to the hospital yourself, you're not able to park in that situation. The valet lot is in the red. Again, it's sort of part of the parking supply, but not really, and with the proposed MOB, that utilization would be moved elsewhere, probably to the parking garage on these side lots. This yellow lot right here is that garage, the emergency lot, and the side lot that I pointed out earlier. This is how much is utilized throughout the day, and this is sort of the total capacity. So what we did was we took all these 3 numbers right here, we created this black line of total parking capacity, which was 1,033 spots by our count, and built that that utilization throughout the day. And we got about 80% utilized under the existing parking capacity. Related to the on-street parking, our feeling is that and what we've observed from people coming in and out of those park cars, it's really one of two reasons. It's one, it's out of convenience. People don't want to bother driving into the parking garage, having to park, walking back. So they can park on George Street currently for up to 2 hours, and then they walk in the hospital, they're in and out, or they try to be. And then two is just to avoid paying for parking in the garage. So
If you took all those cars that were parking on the street
correct.
and you put them into the supply numbers, would it change it much?
It's 36 is what I counted, so it could be up or down depending on the time of day, what particular day that you're out doing there. It does change it, but it doesn't, it's not like they're going to run out of capacity because of moving these cars from I think in terms of the supply, again, I think it becomes more of a policy issue related to what Montclair allows for parking in that general area. Glen Ridge has already kind of addressed that particular issue by requiring residential parking hang tags. So people tend to park in those areas because they don't want to get depleted. So then what we did was we took what was existing, we took what was proposed by the developer. You saw the site plan. All told, it was about a net growth of parking spaces when you add in the number of parking spaces and subtract the valet lots of about 250 new parking spaces. So that's this line right here. It's about 250. We didn't add in the additional 56 spaces for the ER because that's not really related to the MOB. If you looked at a general parking supply, that approves things a little bit for the general parking supply for the hospital, but not necessarily for the proposed medical office building. So what we use as a resource too is that in the Institute of Traffic Engineers, there is a parking generation manual. So we took this, and what they do is they do a number of parking studies, and they'll say, okay, based on these number of studies generated over time, here's sort of the peak utilization of time. There's a formula based on the square footage related to the office building, and that's how you sort of generate this future demand model. So at the top of the peak parking demand for the MOB, according to the manual, it's about 191 compared to the 250 for the MOB that they're proposing. The other thing to keep in mind is under Montclair's zoning ordinance, the requirement for an office building is 1 per 150 square feet. What that ends up being is about 400 parking spaces. So they're addressing the parking demand as it's modeled through the manual, but they're falling short of what Montclair puts out as a requirement for parking spaces in one of these sites. So then the next step was saying, okay, well, we have existing, we have sort of that proposed idea. So what does that look like in terms of parking capacity of all? So this orange line is the result of that, adding that green line from that previous black line of what the total capacity was going to be, and then what the peak demand is going to be. And it gets to a little over 1,000, so they definitely need those parking spaces without a doubt. But it does sort of add to that net supply, adding the 250 total. This black line is sort of that carryover from that previous slide. So you see the growth in demand, and then you see the growth in capacity as well.
Okay, I have a question.
Okay.
Thank you for talking so much about parking. My questions are about access.
Sure.
And there was a gentleman in the Montclair meeting who was asking you a lot of questions that you could not answer about not just current access to the hospital, but access in terms of the build, in terms of the large truck, in 2 years, access in terms of how many, when all these parking spaces are built,
Sure.
what roads are they taking? And in 5 years, the gentleman requested a projected access report from you.
Correct. So what we're doing is we're basically generating 4 traffic models as part of this. One is existing condition. What is, based on the camera measurements, what is sort of the traffic circulation today? And then what we'll do is we'll do a future no-build scenario, which, based on New Jersey DOT standards, it's about 1% annually. So we'll decide on a future out year, 5 years down the road, so basically be a compounding growth of about 5%. To that, so understanding like what that circulation is just from other developments in Montclair, Glen Ridge, Bloomfield, whatever, and how that affects traffic generation through that area. We'll do a third step of adding this MOB as part of the existing, under the current network, without closing up George Street, without closing Laurel Place, and take a look at what that looks like. And then what we'll also do is we'll do that future build scenario with some of these mitigation strategies involved. So people will also be able to see what are the impacts of closing George Street, the growth of the adding the MOB site, future growth as a sort of a general surrounding area and things like that.
So you don't have the report now, and you can't really show us now
Correct.
how that would work, but there will be another meeting where you will show us
Yes,
how?
yeah. One of the things that we mentioned we're missing is that we have, there's that signalized intersection at Highland Avenue and Bay Street. So what that does is that affects sort of that level of service of these roadways. It affects sort of the delay. I don't expect a huge impact from adding sort of that signal timing onto this intersection, but it would be irresponsible to do that kind of model without having that included in part of the analysis. So we just haven't taken that next step.
Can we just hold the questions to the end? We're almost there. We're one slide away from the end. So I just wanted to wrap it up and talk about what the next steps are, because we already started talking about that with your question. So we're continuing this process. Again, this is just, there's nothing set in stone. So we're continuing to meet with Hampshire and the hospital, refining the concepts. The next step then is to develop the draft redevelopment plan, hold public hearings on the redevelopment plan, and I believe we're looking preliminary towards the end of January for the public hearing. The planning boards of both municipalities would need to adopt the plan in order for it to become effective. It then becomes essentially an ordinance. Then each town works with designating the developer and negotiating the redevelopment agreement. And the redevelopment agreement, they can negotiate all types of things. And then finally, the developer would submit their site plan application to each planning board to get it approved, and that application must meet the conditions and what's specified in the redevelopment plan, which is why this process is so important. So just to wrap it up, because I'm sure you're done with hearing from us, we heard from the hospital, and we heard that there is a clear shift in the medical industry for a number of reasons, and a clear demand for medical office. I think we can all agree that the hospital is a major community asset here, and we want to make sure they survive. But at the same time, we also need to make sure that we're addressing the issues that are important to the community, and this is the opportunity to do that. So I took the approach where I zoomed out, I showed you existing conditions and sort of what the hospital is proposing thus far. Then Ralph took us through, kind of walking us around, and then Eric went through and told us a lot of numbers and information about traffic and parking. So now the most important part of the meeting is that we really need to hear from you. We can throw up any of these slides, the hospital's concepts, or any of the aerials, whatever, so we can get your questions, your feedback, your issues, your comments, and so forth.
Please come up to the mic, though.
Sure.
So,
I got 10 minutes of things I wanted to talk about.
great.
Great.
We're here.
My name is Eric Baker. I live at 9 Laurel Place. First question is for the CEO. I forgot your name.
John.
Okay, John. John, on the occupant load of the new building. What is the occupant load of the new building?
Sorry, I don't understand your question.
What is the occupant load of the new building? The 60,000 square foot building.
You mean like maximum occupancy capacity?
Yeah, how many people are you going to put in that
Like
building?
because of building code, or?
Just your projected occupant load of that building. How many people are you going to have in that building?
I think it's
You've
touching like
designed the
staff, employees, visitors.
It's a three-story building, 20,000 square feet on each level. We're projecting about 50 positions practicing in there, not all at once because we're scheduling time off. projecting about 4 paid equivalents for every doctor that's in there, so that's about 240. Again, that doesn't assume that they're all practicing at the same time.
Okay, you spoke about the hospital, and the chart that you showed was that you're not having people stay in the hospital more, you're having more people leave the hospital earlier. How does that impact the car count in the hospital?
Well, you figure that for every inpatient day, it requires 4 to 5 employees. And we've dropped the inpatient census over the last 10 years by 43 patients a day.
Okay.
So that's worth almost 200 employees less on the inpatient side. But what's also occurring is the outpatient's going up. Because so much is moving to an outpatient delivery model due to technology, those types of things.
So help me, Eric, understand the capacity of the parking. Is that going to change with the new philosophy of how you're running the hospital? Meaning that the parking garage right now is not full. I've gone there and I've watched it. It's not full. You are now taking green space that you stated is not important. It's not being used. It's very important. It's very used. Having green space is very important.
It was important.
Okay, but it is very important, and now you're putting it with a parking lot. So what I'm trying to understand is that you're on the philosophy track of making the hospital basically less term in it. How does it impact the parking? Because if you don't need all that parking space right now, which is hideous, can you use the facility that you have and people are going to have to walk a little further, I understand, but can you use that parking garage at full capacity to deal with this situation? That's one question. I need to know where you're headed with your hospital, and does that impact the parking? Do you understand the question?
Yes, I do. I guess there's 2 ways of addressing that. From the sound of it, without notice.
You don't have to answer my question and tell me how you're going to solve it. I'm just bringing up points of what I think are going to be major issues.
I think understanding what you're talking about, I think you're going to expect to see a little bit of a more turnover from being outpatient, people coming in, you mentioned like about 3 to 4 hours for the visit, rather than staying overnight or 3 to 4 days or something like that. So that's going to be one impact. But at the same time, that the parking seems to be needed for that turnover, because you can't always get to that full capacity at the same time that you
Understand. So anyway, that's one point I'm raising. The second point I want to raise is it's a lot of parking. It's a lot of parking in an area that is contextually residential, and you've designed a building that belongs on Route 1 or 208. It doesn't belong in Glen Ridge. And the historical committee is going to go to town on you, and I'm just telling you right now, you need to come up with a building that looks more contextual, that addresses a 30-foot high building right next to it. Now, you talked, I forget your name, what was her name?
Jessica.
I'm Jessica.
Jessica, you talked about a 40-foot buffer from that street, Blackwell? Roswell Terrace. 40-foot buffer really isn't enough for that. I understand that zoning-wise, what you want to do, and I get it, and trees are great, but 40-foot isn't enough with a 36 to 40-foot high building. So the issue is, you need to create a building that is a little bit more contextual in addressing the neighbors of it.
Well, we met with the Roswell Terrace neighbors a couple weeks ago. We were able to show them on that right there, the height of the building is actually less than what's currently there at the School of Nursing.
Yeah.
The footprint of the School of Nursing is significantly larger than the medical office building. So everything you're suggesting on shrinking of a presence is going to occur with medical office buildings. It's not as high as what's currently there.
And I'm with you there.
Possible footprint.
Okay.
Also, going back to your question about the inpatient care coming down, outpatient care going up, probably the best measurement I can give you is we have to staff to the patient activity. We have to provide the nurses and such. If you look at our employment base on total paid FTEs over that period of time, that slide shows it's relatively flat, right around 1,200.
Yeah.
So the amount of employee base to deliver care more in an outpatient than an inpatient pretty much nets out to what it's been over the years.
Okay.
In terms of a building that looks more contextual,
Yeah.
do you have feedback for the developer?
Yeah, you haven't gone before the historical board, have you?
The Glen
In
Ridge?
Glen Ridge, yeah.
No, not the Glen Ridge Historical Board.
Yeah, so that's going to be a part of it, and I'm an
Well, I
architect.
believe they are setting up a meeting with the Historic
Okay, excuse me,
Commission.
the hospital zone is outside Historic Preservation District.
Okay.
So the HPC, or Historic Preservation Commission, has no, it's
Authority.
outside their purview.
Right.
So if they go to the commission, it's just as an advisory, a recommendation, rather than,
I think that, again, as being a good neighbor, and by the way, your presentation is fantastic. I'm an architect, I've done this many times, and I think your presentation is great, and I'm not picking on you, I'm just telling you things that I think that are for my family, this is my neighborhood, so
Right.
I really think there's things that you need to address. I want to bring up the point of your intersection, where you want to put that intersection. Right now, there's a light at the hospital, and at high time, that light backs up to the new stop light we have, new stop signs that we have right by the CVS. It's a friggin' nightmare. And you're exasperating that by that plan. I don't see that getting better. I see that getting worse, because you're going to back up to the stop sign, which is going to back up into the train tracks, and God forbid something's going to happen. So I don't think that's the right solution. I understand it. I know why you did it. But I still think that line is going to back up on Claremont all the way to the train tracks, and I think that's a bad issue. I see it now. I don't have a solution for you. I think contextually, I think you should talk to the historical board, because they have great value, and I think that even the peaks that are the gables that are put on the hospital right now lend a little bit to what Glen Ridge is about, and even if you can get something like that, granted, it's more money for you, I get the cost issues, but can we come up with something that's in between that just looks, that fits better into the neighborhood? That's all. Other than that, great job. Thanks for your time.
Hi, I'm Christina Gabriel from 14 Laurel Place, and I just wanted to say also, great job on the presentation. Thank you so much for hearing us out, and, you know, we really appreciate it. We know this is an undertaking. The issue I want to bring up is security. With the green space you're talking about adding, and I love the idea of green space and running trails, biking trails, whatever. As a woman, or as a man, but particularly as a woman, I walk up from the Bay Street train station every night. It gets dark at 5 o'clock. I've been followed at the end of Bay Street by the hospital, and I've actually taken refuge in the emergency room when that was happening. I want to make sure whatever green space you plan, that there is ample security to support it and protect people as they are walking home from work, whether that's security cameras that are well announced to deter shenanigans, or increased staffing, et cetera. Again, I know there's a cost, but I just want you to take security in mind with the plans. Thank you.
Hi, Deborah Dine from 6 Laurel Place. Could you just please address that question that I had, Ralph, about why Laurel Place is not included in the plan at this time?
So in the process that occurred here, and Jessica, chime in if I misspeak, but in the process that occurred here, to get to this point, basically what happens is that there was a series of properties that were identified as areas in need of redevelopment. That process happened prior to this planning process that we're in right now. So those properties were
When did that happen exactly?
So the governing bodies of each town decide which parts.
I understand that, but what was the date that happened?
Okay, so that was probably authorized at the end of 2014?
2014.
Yeah.
And I think, by mentioning redevelopment zone, and Jessica and Ralph agree, correct me, we also had a look in the council about areas that would meet the definition.
Right.
And Laurel Place, in my opinion, and Hathaway Place, would not meet the definition for redevelopment based on the statute. And correct me if I'm wrong.
Right. No, you're correct. So it's a matter of looking at which properties would meet the criteria in the local redevelopment housing law. Then they put together a resolution, and then we did that study and designated those areas. So the reason Laurel Place kind of isn't shown on our maps is because, you know, those aren't the properties that are being studied.
There are 2 points to highlight, though, here, which is, I think you've come into the process seeing the opportunity that's out here, and I get that. And I think it's important to note that the data that's coming out of this process is certainly to the benefit, not just of the individual streets or property owners that are within the redevelopment zone, but, you know, we're looking as far out as Pine Street, we're looking out as far as Laurel Place, we're looking, you know, down the hill, up the hill as we go. I think that there's probably a way for you to benefit from this process more directly, and I don't know if it's a direct interface with this redevelopment plan, or if it's taking the data that is being collected from this redevelopment plan to go through a normal planning and zoning process. And it's worth a sidebar conversation.
What do you have to say about that, Mike?
Okay. Well, I think to note, we had a designation for area redevelopment, but we also had a study area.
Right.
And Laurel Place is included in the study area, as well as areas in Montclair, Pine Street, a host of areas. So what we want to do is assemble the data from, in this case, from the traffic engineer, and then come with recommendations for within the redevelopment area and also within the study area. Because the study area was quite broad that both Montclair and Glenridge agreed upon.
So how could we get our study area included in?
Well, I think it's, I'll do this maybe offline, there's a difference between a redevelopment zone, which we would have to have if you went to the meeting, certain criteria on the condition of the homes. And Laurel Place and Halfway Place to connect you to the redevelopment area, I don't think would ever qualify as a redevelopment zone. But improvements in the study area, that would be a different conversation, and that's what I'm going.
But doesn't the zoning at the top of the street actually is hospital zoning? For the top two houses at the top of Laurel Place is not the R2, R3 zoning, it's hospital zoning.
That's correct. But what we have to look at is the structures themselves. Do they meet the definition of an area of redevelopment? And I think the condition of those homes, as Ralph pointed out, there's areas where we have dilapidated homes, which easily qualify for the area we need a redevelopment. I just don't think Laurel Place could be added under that designation, but there may be other ways to get the improvements we see.
Okay, and where should we, how should we?
Why don't you stay till the end, if you're able to, if you can stay till the end of the meeting, and let's at least have a sidebar at the end.
We're happy to hash it out, yeah?
Yeah,
Great.
a little bit.
Thank you.
Hi, Daniel Kopek, 289 Bay Avenue. I've got two questions. The first is, Glenridge as a municipality is part of Sustainable Jersey, right? And for those who don't know, Sustainable Jersey is a nonprofit organization that municipalities participate in. They get support to improve their sustainable efforts, and they also have potential financial incentives back. I know that the borough has several resolutions about improving green development, and I wanted to make sure that those actions, complete streets, stormwater management, amount of parking, etc., are implemented into the redevelopment plan. The second part was sort of alluded to earlier regarding the architecture. With no disrespect to the person who made those renderings, it's rather soulless. You know, as an architect professionally myself, every major building in this town has some amount of character. I'm not suggesting, as the person who lives directly next door to that thing, that you make a sort of faux representation of history. You know, I don't think we need to recreate something fakely, but I think there's issues of proportion and scale and materiality that can drive this building to make it feel contextual, feel 21st century, but fit into a town that is largely 100 years old.
I just want to respond to two things that you said, and thank you for your comments. One is in all the redevelopment plans that we've been involved, that I've been involved with, that my office has been involved with, there has been an overlay of looking at sustainability guidelines as it relates to either LEED criteria, Energy Star criteria, complete streets, as you mentioned, as well as other things. A part of the process here, as I mentioned earlier, is to set out some targets and goals. And if there are existing targets and goals in Glen Ridge that have either been created by ordinance or are in discussions currently, we should just make sure that we have all of what you're trying to reach for in terms of what you want new buildings to achieve. The other point I want to make is about the contextual issues, and I want to go back to two slides for just a second to highlight them. I'm just going to jump back.
Do you want
Not,
these?
actually, not to that, but to the aerials.
Which one?
Let's go to the first area for a second.
This?
Sorry, no, the one before it. There you go. So one of the things that I was trying to highlight, probably didn't do a great job of earlier in the presentation, but I want to just revisit again for a second, is the issue of context at this site is tricky. And I think as the architects in the audience know that we're dealing with really big differences in scale from a hospital to a medical office building to residential buildings. You can see the difference in scale of a parking garage as it relates to these little tiny residential houses right nearby. And it's important to hear both about the issues of what is the street experience or the visual experience of what you do and don't see, and what are the things that you just don't want to see or you want to kind of go away. What the hospital has done to date, and I'm not necessarily advocating for this, but I'm trying to highlight it, is that they have looked at creating a smaller footprint and a lower building with the intent that at least along Roswell Terrace and perhaps along the street that the building essentially goes away. And we've had a number of conversations with them about trying to deal with the contextual issue of how do you create more of a campus, more of a hospital campus, where there is a relationship between this building and the hospital itself. I'm not going to suggest that we have the right solution on the table right now, nor am I going to suggest that we have all of the best ideas here. I want to point out those issues because I think there's some strong comments that have been made about the architecture. And if you think about those in this context, if there's other points that you want to make, that would be helpful too.
Well, if you get to be very specific, we take the existing building on campus. We've got a 1920s era building. I mean,
with four additions as well.
Right. The original building, 1920s.
Correct.
Right. Fantastic character of that building. Tragedy to see it go. I recognize, that maybe it's larger than what it would need to be. But you look immediately next to it to a building that was probably mid-century, mid-60s.
Exactly.
And my kindergartner can point out the distinction between them. One has issues of, everything about it, from the proportions of it, to the materiality, to the scale, to the detailing, makes it feel like it belongs here.
Mm-hmm.
And the 50s edition that is next to it doesn't have any of that character.
Sure.
And the point was made about this building could be anywhere, anything could be happening in that building. That building could be a paper factory. That building could be, it doesn't matter. Right? So I think it needs to speak to this place, and without getting into the specifics or without being the person designing that thing, I don't know that I can lay out what all those things need to be, but I think the resolution should probably address these ideas, right? At least big picture ideas,
Sure.
in the way that most municipalities that have a historic ordinance or, reference these things in their building ordinances, spell it out insofar as it allows then the design professional to come in and be a design professional and put all these things together, rather than potentially taking something that at the end of the day, to me, feels very atextual.
Mm-hmm.
So
outside of the issues that you've raised about scale, and I understand that the goals is
And again, to take it one step further for the conversation, right, for the benefit of the conversation, in redevelopment plans, we have the opportunity to do things like define where is your frontage, to define what materials are allowed and not allowed, to define issues of proportion, not just in terms of the overall building, but how you address the street, how you enter the building, things like that. So this is that opportunity to put some of those defining characteristics out there and say, these are the things that we consider to be contextual for our town and for our neighborhood. The point I'm trying to reflect back again is that context is not easily defined in this particular location.
So you can sort of make out where the entrance to that building is.
Sure.
Right, you see a little bit of the canopy, but you can look at the entrance of the existing nursing school.
Right.
There's a
loggia.
portico, there's a loggia over it, there's the central entrance.
Absolutely.
You point out the entrance. Every other building in this town, every school, and this building that we're in today, you can clearly demarcate where the entrance to that building is, the public building. Right? So people are meant to walk into this building once you know where that entrance is. right? And that should feel different than the rest of the building, right?
It's one example, and it's a good one. It's a really good one, so thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have the architect who put together these plans here with us to kind of like defend this approach, but I can only imagine it was meant to kind of make it fit in more with the hospital now across the street. But we don't have them here to defend it.
Hello, Paul Gerbino, 272 Bay Avenue. Hey, Mike, how you doing? Can you put up that slide on traffic?
This one?
That one. First of all, I'm sure your numbers show that the westbound is busy in the AM and the eastbound is busy in the PM. But if you ever try to get out of a driveway on Bay Avenue in the morning when it's backed up from Ridgewood Avenue all the way to Sherman, reality or experience will obviously argue with your numbers. Do you have at this point, with all the development you're talking about, all the redirection of traffic, Laurel, and all this stuff, what the impact's going to be on Bay Avenue itself? In other words, you're adding more spots. You're obviously adding more traffic patterns because people are going to be coming in for the day to go to the doctor, right? And you're talking about a lot of spots, a lot of doctors, and I think the fact that you're expanding the hospital is a good thing. Do we know what the impact is, or do you have any projections on the traffic patterns and the volume on Bay Avenue?
No, not at this point. Once we have that light, we can generate, use the model and generate that traffic.
Sure.
We'll be able to understand the impacts on sort of the peak hours that we
Right. But you've been involved with the numbers, you've been watching, you've been driving around with Mike. Do you have a sense that the traffic will get better on Bay Avenue, will stay the same, will get worse?
A sense is sort of a funny thing.
Well, Eric.
I'm going to pass on getting specific data.
All right, I try to put you on the spot. I appreciate that.
I want to leave it to the analysis. I sort of want to be sort of agnostic about
right.
that. I mean, it's sort of intuitive. Anytime that you add a new development to an existing roadway, you're going to add traffic to that. When you change the idea of Bay Avenue, basically from Bay Avenue to Claremont Avenue, operating basically free flow. What happens when you put in a signal there with some timing, knowing that, because of the four-way intersection further downstream at Pine Street has already started to generate queues
Sure.
up that way too. So, I mean, intuitively, that there is going to be some impact associated with that. What the true impact is, moving more beyond just sort of what it feels like to level of service of that intersection, how the roadway actually operates with this additional volumes and things like that associated with it. That's what the analysis is going to be.
Okay, great. And just a question to the CEO. You're a for-profit hospital, right? So you have a profit motive, which is really important because I really believe in business and profit and all that kind of stuff. How much do you weigh, as a businessman and as a human being, the negative impacts on Laurel and all the other things that's going to happen, because there will be some negative impacts, in your desire for profit? I mean, how do you sit down and really try to measure all that?
I did not approach this from a for-profit mindset on how much we can make. I'm approaching it on how do I meet the community's growing healthcare needs by recruiting doctors to deliver care.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've been very sensitive to the neighbors. We've sat down with the Roswell Care group on a couple of occasions. We've kept the internet open on the improvements we're trying to make. I might flip the question around, what if we don't do this? Are you prepared to drive to St. Barnabas in the middle of the night, or to Claremont, or some other hospital in order to get help?
Sure. And by the way, I have gone to Barnabas because Barnabas was a much better hospital than Mountainside for years. So I do appreciate that.
I won't debate.
That's right.
With you on that. I don't think we're here for that purpose. But my purpose is we've addressed this growing healthcare need of the community.
Sure.
What we need for physicians and office space for quality specialists and primary care doctors to practice. And at the end of the day, if we do the right things for the patient in this community, we can pay our bills. We'll do fine. Okay. The question is, if we don't do it, and I think New Jersey is the best example of any state in the nation, Are you prepared as a community to see a hospital close? Okay, they're happening all around us. And, you know, we've been fortunate, to avoid that. And there was a close call in '07 when the ownership came. We're in a good position, but we just don't want to get complacent. We got to continue to address what the community needs in healthcare. At the end of the day, a for-profit is nothing more than a tax status. It's not a business model, okay? In fact, today, you probably, well, right, if you're in New Jersey, they're trying to figure out how to tax the not-for-profits, okay? So it's a tax status, it's not a business model. So,
Oh, fair enough, thank you.
My name's Mike Landy. I'm at 8 Roswell Terrace. I'm here with my wife, Marianne. We're actually the house, it's the notch on the top right under the word MOB. And I just wanted to take the opportunity really to talk to get on record and to talk to, you know, our planning board representatives that, you know, our property is probably the most affected by at least the nursing school redevelopment. And you know, right now we have like a park-like setting that we look at, and we have a building that's blocking Bay Ave, the noise, the sound, everything that could potentially be, you know, disruptive to our way of life. That's all going to change, and we're probably the most affected out of this redevelopment for that area. And I just want to make sure that you know, every effort is made to address the fact that a commercial property is now going to abut a residential property in a very significant way. A parking lot is a lot different than an open green space. And to go, you know, above and beyond to try and address the fact that our way of life is going to change big time. And right now, I'll be honest with you, I don't feel as if the buffers are sufficient for what's been presented for our property specifically. I totally appreciate what John and his team have done for Roswell Terrace, and I think they went above and beyond, but I'm looking at it now selfishly as what's going to happen to me, and I just want to go and let you know that. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pam Foster, I live in Laurel Place. Let me just start by saying thank you for the presentation and for taking the time to listen to the Laurel Place concerns in particular. We really appreciate it. And also, thank you for the presentation from the hospital. I can't speak for my whole neighborhood because we haven't had this conversation, but I mean, I think it is important to us to have a hospital, and so I personally think, you know, what you're doing is great, and I appreciate the process of having the neighborhood be able to comment. The one thing I just want to add to everything you've already talked about is just to make sure you think through the signage. Right now, as somebody who walks through that neighborhood on a daily basis, either going to and from the train or just walking up into town, which I do regularly, I am always stopped by cars who don't know where they're going, people who can't even figure out how to walk in and out of the buildings because the signage is so poor right now. So just please think that through well as part of the plan.
Thank you. The point's been made on a couple of occasions.
Okay.
I'm sure it's going to be addressed.
Great, thanks.
We should highlight too that there's been a recognition also that the street signage names, even just between Montclair and Glen Ridge, because of where the borders are, need to be realigned and addressed too. So that's on the plate as well.
Hi, my name is Lenore Kirk, 41 Hathaway Place. I was a little bit concerned that you mentioned Hathaway Place, and I'd like you to explain if you had plans for Hathaway Place. Ralph, you mentioned...
We were using it as an example of what's gone right, and Hathaway Place is not under consideration for any changes. We were using the example of the intersection of Hathaway Place and, I'm sorry, thank you, Highland, as an example of what could be applied to George Street or what could be applied to other residential streets nearby to be able to improve some of the conditions. So there's no plans right now to impact Hathaway Place. We're looking at all of the streets that are affected. What should be highlighted, though, is that all of the streets that are in the study area, from a traffic and parking consideration, we know will have some impact. So we're paying attention to that.
Well, I also would like to stress that indeed we are moving, we are in the 21st century, and having a green infrastructure is incredibly important. Permeable, instead of, parking lot. You actually have three professional offices that are indeed in need of repair, and I'm sure you could partner better. Instead of building something new, you're actually not recycling and not being earth-friendly. I live on the corner of Hathaway, and indeed, living next to a hospital is very stressful, and it is not what you think. The landscape, they don't mulch anymore, and they don't maintain the trees. I've actually had to go and purchase a tree and plant it, and I actually mulch it because I am earth-friendly, and, I want to keep it up. I've called my town several times, and unfortunately, Kelly and many people do not listen because, after all, they're just plants and soil. Well, plants and soil is what everyone needs. You go hiking, you go walking, and I'd like to tell you, sir, that you have a responsibility to your hospital and employees, and those people walk. Those people go out, and they smoke their cigarettes, and they leave the butts on all over the cul-de-sac. I don't know about your lunch facilities, but I have gone in there, and it is outdated, and they do go out, and they do walk down to the streets trying to look for food, and they sit on Hathaway, and wherever, there's a nice sunny day, they go out. But also, I do want to stress that, you're saying that you're expecting turnovers, that people are going in and out, or you're expecting more people to come. But also, those people go out and they smoke cigarettes and they talk on their phone. And like I said, the hospital is stressful, and I've heard conversations. I'm in the cul-de-sac, and I've heard people crying, and I've heard personal stories, and there should be a place for them to go. There should be a place for your employees to go, to walk, to jog, because a lot of them do come out and jog, believe it or not, during their lunchtime, and they should go where it says smoke here, not on, not on private property, but, whether, I think we're like 30 feet away or 50 feet away, that is not sufficient amount of buffering for any person that wants to have a life. So, what else could I say? Well, the contextual use is pretty evident. We want to keep it in historical. We've lived in this town for a very long time, and we want to see it maintained. There's a lot of things you could do to use what structure you have now, and I don't know. Are you really serious about making the train a bike path, or because that's New Jersey Transit, and I find people that's been on the floor before, and it's hard to pass.
The conversation point there, just to clarify for everybody, is not the New Jersey Transit line, but there is a decommissioned rail line that's privately owned, that there's been conversation between municipalities about this. There's no specific plans for it. The point that I was trying to make is that within the redevelopment plan, we want to make allowances for it so that that possibility can remain an option.
Well, I also think that, in this plan, that with the trees, there should be a definite point person that maintains the trees and that maintains the watering of the trees, because I know on the parking lot, the large parking lot you have now, there's not sufficient watering, and even though we have sprinklers, they don't turn them on. So I know that trees are dying, and at this point, they're in their later stage of life where they need to be replanted and refilled. So, all these things should be talked about and planned. I believe maybe that might be it for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Peter Harrigal. I live on Glen Ridge Parkway in Glen Ridge, and I also am the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. And while Mike indicated that the development here is not within the scope of the the historic district, we certainly have a strong interest in what you're doing, and I echo some of the sentiments of both people who appreciate your presentation tonight. It's very helpful, it's very informative, but I and other members of the commission who are also here, and Dan Kopek, who was one of the people who lives next door, he also was on the commission. We echo the sentiments, or I echo the sentiments of trying to have the building that is built to fit in and respect the architectural integrity of the town and the character, and try to fit in. And I think that it would be nice, I guess, to get some comments from the architect who designed it, to see if so we can appreciate the thought process that went on, and perhaps we can give some input into that as well. But I think certainly we understand the need, and at least I, from a resident standpoint, appreciate the hospital's presence and foresight and looking into how it can better serve the community, and I'm all for that. But obviously we think that there's a balance that can be reached, and to the extent that the commission can help or provide some insight, we're certainly happy to do that as well. Thank you.
I'm Lisa Duffus. I live at 235 Sherman Avenue, and I'd just like to express my concerns over the scope of the project. And while I respect the need for the hospital to be able to grow and meet, the community's needs, you do have quite a large property, building, structure that's in existence. And again, the scope of a 60,000 square foot medical office building. And, in Glen Ridge, we are a residential community. We all bought our properties and want to keep it a residential community, especially with regards, the scope is going to impact the parking. I know you're adding 250 additional parking spaces, but I lived on Sherman Avenue before the permits were required, and we had huge issues with parking. And so, I'm concerned that the parking needs are not going to be met. I also would like to know if the redevelopment plan would address what the cost of the parking could be, because if it's gated, and right now people have to pay to access your parking garage, as those costs increase, that will drive people to park on the streets. So I would like to know if that would be included in the redevelopment plan, or is that part of the scope?
Right, the cost of parking isn't something that we can really affect. That's definitely the hospital's purview. But addressing your concerns by making sure that there's enough parking in the plan so that we're not pushing the parking out onto the streets, that's really in our purview.
Right, so, obviously when that parking cost goes up, people will be driven out to, and that's going to impact the residential, nature of the surrounding area. And the second, regarding the traffic patterns, really Bay Avenue and Ridgewood, that intersection is quite a mess, and you guys didn't address that at all. You generously referred to Bay Avenue as wide, and that's like really a two-lane road, and it is difficult to even, walk on the sidewalks there. So if you're adding a lot of additional cars, I'm not sure that the plan is addressing what's going to happen at Ridgewood and Bay. So I'd like you guys to consider that. Thank you.
Hello, Leah Ross, Laurel Place again. One of the things that comes to mind, I'd also like to thank you for giving us the time to meet with you and speak with you. One of the things that comes to mind is you reference St. Barnabas, and you also reference Clara Mass. And those dwellings are really in an area that has, I think, about 6 lanes of traffic going both ways, if I'm correct. And the only road that's really leading into Mountainside is Ridgewood Avenue. Then you're going into smaller roads. So that's the largest road that we have. And I worry when you say you're putting additional parking, you're building additional buildings, that
all of that has to feed on one main road, and how that's actually going to be feasible. The other thing is, one of the reasons why, and I can't speak for our neighbors, but one of the reasons why we moved to Glen Ridge was because of the school systems, the excellent school system. And having to get our children to those schools to be educated is a main concern. So coming off of Laurel, Hathaway, or Sherman, any of those streets in the surrounding area, we're going to be stuck either at Bay or at Ridgewood. And if you have more than one child who are split between both schools, Ridgewood Avenue School or Forest Avenue School, I mean, from a time standpoint, how is that possible? If you're thinking about traffic lights, are we talking about a 6-minute traffic light? Are we going to be waiting at a 6-minute traffic light, a 4-minute traffic light? And just as a last thought, had you given any consideration, and I'm sure you have, especially at this point in time, to perhaps another area in Montclair, or just another area for your building? Maybe have a separate campus, maybe have a shuttle from one campus to the other. I just think that this space is very small. That's all.
Thank you.
Joe Iovino on Laurel Place, 16 Laurel. Years ago, you guys added another deck to the parking garage. What year was that? So it was a big to-do because the garage was so high, and we added. Was that necessary? Like looking back now, do people drive to the top and use that with that new garage? I'm just asking.
Stop there, where capacity though, we cannot take any of the effect on that.
So it was a good move to put that additional deck up. And it just seems like it's really far away now from where everything is happening, and the additional parking spaces. Why would anyone park on a deck that we fought to not make it go up now, and it did go up 15 years ago or so, and now we're moving, which was kind of obvious that those would be parking lots, but are we using the existing garage and the existing parking lot currently, that we have to put this airport grid here, you know, where that green space is now, and it just seems like there's an awful lot of parking, and parking brings cars and leaves cars, and it just, how are you going to get the cars there in and out? I don't see why that's necessary in the scope of things when you have, because where would you rather park? In the new garage, in the garage that's 4 or 5 stories up? And you said it before, and that's why you see, even though there's signs no parking, and on the right side of Walnut Crescent or Highland, whatever that is, right by the hospital, there's always cars parked there, and they shouldn't be. And people are going to want the shortest distance, but that parking garage now seems almost out of the realm compared to the new medical building. And is the thing that looks like a Newark airport, yeah, that, and across the street from that is the current lot, but there's a lot that's only doctors. Now, will that lot move?
No, what you're seeing occurring today is the fact that if you're a family coming in to use the emergency room, drop the patient off, the first thing you do is grab the first place you can find, which is all this long George. You don't use the parking garage that you would hope it would be used. So the plan, of course, is that this green space will be used for emergency room parking and not high up street parking as is currently going. Obviously, we can all identify that when you have a family member at the ED, the last thing you're looking for is follow parking instructions. You grab the first thing you can. That's what's been going on for years, so we're hoping that we can make a improve our efficiency on valet parking for both the main entrance and the Harris Center. So,
But I'm wondering who's, everyone's using the lot now and the deck that we added, another deck. Wouldn't they all move closer? Wouldn't,
I'm gonna require my employees, as it is now, to use the parking garage. That's the least convenient.
I see.
That's obvious.
They're not doing that now?
They are doing it, but not to the level I would like.
Okay.
Some of them have found ways to work the system to their benefit.
Okay.
They're human like everybody else, so my point is, I wanna make the parking garage primarily for the employees, the closer access for the emergency room and valet, as well as meet the requirements for medical office building space, which I can't make all across the street. That's why this part here was designed to meet about 300 parking places, about 100 here, about 200 here, for the medical office. The employees for the MOB will park here and cross over. The patients and the doctors will make use of this space. That use the medical office building. This should be, for the most part, somewhat of a self-contained operation, for lack of a better term. Most patients are going to come and go and see their physician here. Most doctors will go in the office to work the day, go home. So we're hopeful that the traffic coming over to the hospital will be minimal. So we're hoping this will be very much self-contained.
And then those two lots, the two new lots would be for the medical building?
This in here?
No, across the street.
Yeah, this will be for the medical office building employees. That's about 100 places. This is about 200.
Okay.
And then this will be for the emergency room, as it is today.
Right. And you don't think that everyone in the hospital is going to want to park in those two closer lots?
Well, we're going to give access, gate access for employees for the medical office building card. If you don't have a card, you don't get in.
Okay.
And we're hopeful we can do some more innovative things on valet parking for the front entrance of Harry's as well.
Okay.
The efficiency of coming along.
All right, so if you have an appointment in that, you're normally going to be going next to the building. That's,
You should, yes.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, are there any other questions? Well, we've heard a lot of great comments. It's obvious that we have a lot of competing issues to address. We only have so much land, but yet we want to do all these things. We want to make sure there's enough parking. We want to make sure that there's safe circulation. We want more green space.